Ford and GM have long been standing players in the automobile market. They've revolutionized vehicles in the 1900s under powerful leaders like Henry Ford and Alfred Sloan Jr. Stylish annual model changes and cars themselves have all been invented under Ford and GM. Yet under the management of risk-averse CEOs that refuse radical change, Ford and GM may very well go bankrupt in as little as the next year. In this video, we're going to take a look at the billions of debt that both Ford and GM have and determine whether the companies will go bankrupt, and if so, when. Welcome to Casgains Academy. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing for more content like this, and let's get right into it. Before we get into the finances, it's important to understand that this is actually a huge deal. Ford and GM have piled up so much debt that their bankruptcies would shake the stock and bond market by a substantial amount. Ford journalist Jesse Colombo has stated that Ford and GM going bankrupt could create a quote-unquote downward spiral. Now out of both Ford and GM, Ford has a far worse balance sheet. Ford's total debt currently stands at $175.7 billion, which to put into perspective is greater than the GDP of Sri Lanka, Serbia, and Iceland combined. Ford could literally pay each and every one of its employees $921,000 right now if it had as much cash as debt. Not only that, but Ford only has $30 billion worth of cash and cash equivalents, leading Ford's net debt to be a whopping $144 billion. Ford going bankrupt is not just an old company dying off. If Ford went bankrupt right now, each adult in the US would have to pay $689 just to pay off Ford's debt. That's right, if tax money was evenly distributed, you'd have to give the government almost $700 right now if Ford went bankrupt. Not only that, but Ford's margins have been sliding tremendously even before the pandemic. In the fourth quarter of 2019, Ford's US margin dropped from 8.8% to 2.8%, and its margin in China dropped to minus 21.5%. These losses have worsened even more. In the first quarter of 2020, Ford lost $2 billion, and surprisingly, Ford was able to turn a $1 billion profit in the second quarter, despite revenue being down 53% year over year. However, don't be fooled because Ford has some talented accountants at hand. For example, one question to ask is, what do you consider a profit? Because the GAAP profit does not include loan interest. According to Guru Focus, Ford is paying on average 1.05% interest per year on its $175.7 billion of debt, which totals to an amount of $2.6 billion a year. In addition, Ford has delayed $450 million worth of interest in the second quarter of 2020 to the next quarter, which just exposes the short-term accounting magic going on at Ford. Now that we know that Ford is in big trouble, we can quickly skim through GM's finances and see the desperation going on. GM recently struck a deal with the fraud that is Nikola Motors, which truly shows how desperate the automaker is. Now don't get me wrong, GM's side of the deal made sense. Trevor Milton agreed to give away $2 billion worth of stock just so that Nikola could get the right to buy GM's batteries and hydrogen fuel cells. Yet, to associate your company with the fraud shows how desperate the automaker, and more specifically, the GM CEO Mary Barra is. GM has $127 billion worth of total debt and $98 billion worth of net debt. The automaker is also burning through money despite having talented accountants like Ford. In the second quarter of 2020, GM lost $758 million, which isn't as much as Ford, but is still a loss nonetheless. With the levels of debt that Ford and GM have, it's not a question of if Ford and GM will go bankrupt, but rather it's a question of when. Both automakers are piling on debt every single quarter, and it's no secret that this debt bubble will eventually have to pop. In the past 6 months, Ford has added $19 billion of debt, and GM has added $23 billion of debt. Given the existing debt pile, it's no surprise that this debt is at an extremely high interest. Ford's credit rating recently got downgraded to junk status, which literally means that their bonds are junk. If you buy Ford bonds, chances are that you'll never see that money ever again. Ford's first series of bonds was worth $3.5 billion and had an interest rate of 8.5% per year. As you can guess, GM is in the same situation, as the automaker also got downgraded to junk and ended up selling $4 billion worth of bonds at an interest rate of 6.25% per year. This clue not only points to Ford and GM's terrible finances, but also upcoming bankruptcies. Ford and GM's reluctance to go all in on electric vehicles is leading to serious issues. Internal combustion engines are great. They've helped fuel the global economy and improve transportation all around the world. However, they have reached a point of slowing innovation. On the other hand, electric vehicles are becoming better and better with the improvement of thermal regulations of batteries and increasing battery energy density. Out of both Ford and GM, the first bankruptcy is likely going to be Ford. Ford has had awful DNA within its management. They've built a team of managers who have refused to accept change. Take a look at an interview with Ford's former CEO, Mark Fields, who was fired 1 year after this interview.
Does Elon Musk, does he keep you awake at night? I mean, not directly, I mean, but I mean, does he haunt your dreams?
They always ask me the question, what keeps you up at night? Nothing. I am dead tired by the time I get to bed at night. Because I love what I do. But, clearly we take all of our competitors very, very seriously. And actually, when you look at the level of competition that we have in the industry from our traditional competitors, and when you look at these competitors, non-traditional competitors, we're embracing that. It's extremely exciting for us. We're not looking at it as a threat.
But he does seem to have something of a head start here. I mean, so he announces last week this new model, 200,000, immediately people signed up for it, even, 18 months at least before it's even available. I mean, but he's well down this track in a way that Ford and General Motors and others are not, right?
I would disagree with that. I think Elon, what he's done with Tesla has been pretty amazing. And I think the biggest benefit that he's done for the market is just raise the awareness of electrified vehicles. Now, up to date, his company has catered to a very affluent consumer. Our approach, we have one of the largest selections of electrified vehicles: conventional hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and battery electric vehicles. As I said, we're number 2 seller in the US and electrified, and number 1 on plug-in hybrids. We have a lot of experience here.
This is a man that has built the management and team at Ford. He's not scared of the competition in the electric vehicle space and refuses to admit that Tesla has a lead in the space. Given that, you can probably guess that Ford's new CEO, Jim Hackett, has had a horrible time operating the company. He's arguably even worse than Mark, as he went on a CNN interview to state that Elon is competing with Henry Ford, not himself.
So, Elon Musk, for his part, said, and I quote, "There's a good chance that Ford doesn't make it in the next recession." Makes you smile, lights a fire, I'm sure. He's claiming their truck is going to be as powerful as yours, but it's going to drive like a Porsche 911. What tells you Tesla and Elon Musk won't win?
Well, let's balance that, because it meets the criteria of what we talked at the beginning, which is there's a disruptor coming. I happen to compete with a rocket scientist who's really smart, and I respect that about him. And yet, he's competing with the ultimate disruptor in Henry Ford. So when you go 7 miles from here and you see the Rouge complex, Henry bet the company, he goes bankrupt.
Yep.
Because there's no industrial model in the world that has 100,000 people working in it. That one did.
To claim that Elon is competing with Henry Ford is quite ridiculous, and I'm not saying that to disrespect Henry Ford. Jim is using Henry as the competitor of Musk in order for him to set the blame away from him. Jim Hackett is 65 years old and has enough money to retire. He's simply just collecting his annual salary of $17.5 million until he gets fired. When it comes to GM, the story is the same. GM CEO Mary Barra has constantly emphasized that electric cars are the future, yet her actions don't meet up with her words. GM has this huge EV lineup coming soon, but what are the specs? How much will they cost? With such slow electrification, it's just a matter of time before both GM and Ford go bankrupt. Ultimately, the turning point for both Ford and GM is when the Tesla Cybertruck is officially in production. Ford's prized vehicle, the F-150, is Ford's most profitable vehicle, and if Tesla is able to secure just 5% of the market share, this would hurt Ford's profitability substantially. This is no different for GM, as in 2018, GM revealed that the automaker makes $17,000 in pre-tax profit for every full-size pickup truck sold. With over 750,000 pre-orders, the Tesla Cybertruck is bound to steal some of the profits from Legacy Auto, which could leave Ford and GM lagging on their loan interest payments and sooner or later leaving both automakers going bankrupt. The Cybertruck is expected to go into production in late 2021, so this could leave Ford and GM bankrupt by 2022 or 2023. Let me know if, and if so, when you believe Ford and GM will go bankrupt. Do you agree with the estimates that I laid out, or do you believe that Ford and GM will go bankrupt before or after my estimates? If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.